This is going to be a very exciting and an insightful session. This is going to be the first of a few that we're going to do over every week. Yeah. So as you know that the topic of this webinar is driving revenue recovery. This can happen by sales or collections. And this we believe is the only option for business continuity in the current scenario. So the first person, Ravi Karamchetty, next is Rathin Banerjee, Mukund Menon, Anand, Andy Rao as he's better known, Lloyd Matthias. I think most of you would know me. I'll give you a quick introduction into INSALESPRO. So INSALESPRO, as we call it, is the short of Institution for Sales Professionals. The purpose is to build pride in the sales profession. Over to you, Ravi. Take care. I'm muting off.
Good afternoon and thank you, DP. But I'll just quickly identify the key themes for today's discussion. The first and foremost, our belief is that sales and other customer-facing roles would be extremely crucial in this coming times. The second theme for us today is how do we take care of our employees and not limiting. We also need to look after our vendors and our customers. The third, if you really want your frontline customer-facing people to become warriors, it would call for a very resilient mindset. So with these few comments, I would like to pass it on to our first panelist, Mr. Rathin Banerjee.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I trust that you and your loved ones are all safe and sound amid this pandemic of COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, during this crisis, CEOs and MDs of companies, they have to take charge. They have to take stock of their situations, reassess their priorities, provide clarity and psychological safety to the organization, formulate a co-created roadmap for the organization by engaging all the key stakeholders, which include employees, customers, vendors, and business associates. It is time for the leadership to review the broad sense of purpose and revisit the mission to incorporate an element of compassion. I remember Microsoft in that vision and mission, they have empathy, empowerment embedded in that vision and mission. So anyway, that's just an example. But what is the point I'm trying to make is companies have to revisit the mission, factor in reconfigured new business opportunities as per the new normal, and review the organization's preparedness for business continuity, particularly when it is rocked by a crisis of this kind of an enormity. Sales leadership, they cannot just extrapolate business projections because the past is no benchmark for the future. They have to conjure up smartly multiple business scenarios, think beyond the crisis, hope for the best, and prepare for the worst. Leadership has to proactively connect with employees, customers, vendors, give a signal that we are in this crisis together and will come out stronger after the crisis. Redeployment of manpower, reshuffling of sales force, creation of the new jobs, and also the emergence of new segments like e-commerce, new products, applications. Also talent mix change in various companies because people are moving more towards freelancers. They are expected to move toward project-based consultants, machine employees. So that is going to throw up the need for reskilling. With the education pedagogy now moving to the online mode, consequent to the lockdown and social distancing, the training has to be conducted in the virtual mode. Important, therefore, to provide supports for virtual network with embedded cyber security safeguards. It is not only training for the people within the organization, but also probably training of customers. Career advancement cannot be guided by vertical progression, but it is going to largely now hinge on new skills acquired, continuous unlearning, learning, and relearning. Sales leadership has to encourage formation of empowered, self-created teams and not necessarily teams which are only curated by leadership. So that is one. Now I want to make a point that in the short term, business continuity, in my view, should take precedence over business development. So actively engage with existing customers who are already having proven interdependence, trust, performance, and delivery. To assess the demand, sync back with the supply chain, capture the consumer behavior changes. We know for sure that initially when the lockdown was enforced, consumers, they showed tendency to upstock essentials, barring perishables. Demand for consumer durables obviously is likely to remain depressed for some time and more so for premium luxury products. We have to recognize the growing preference and adoption of online shopping, e-commerce, online education, and the likely thrust on self-reliance, which has been recently advocated by a Prime Minister. The other thing which I want to mention is that, yes, the sales team have to reorient to a resilient mindset. So sales teams, they have to reinvent, we have to be more grounded, think on their feet, show resilience, swing into action. Getting quality sales is going to be more important. Customer success is going to be paramount. Just pushing numbers is not going to be the way forward. And taking calibrated steps and data-backed decisions, so that is going to be very important for the way forward. Productivity is going to be the key, and that's very important normally for Salesforce. Time management is very important. They do not have the luxury of time now of sitting with dealers or customers, dining, wining, entertaining them. Okay, so interactions are all going to be at remote. So in that sense, timely virtual meetings, precise communication, data-backed decisions, a laser-sharp focus on liquidity, and strong eye on the supply lines. That's going to be very important. They have to be able to handle customers, not just enable them survive, but revive, preserve, adapt, give solutions, and they have to emerge stronger. So they have to be very assistive influencers in shaping the future vision and make the customers to negotiate the change curve as we are doing with them concurrently. Strategic key account management is also going to be very crucial in this time. Just a few lines with respect to B2B business, because normally what I've said is generic, regardless of whether it is B2C or B2B. But for B2B, normally product services are uniquely tailored to the corporate client's requirements. A corporate client at his end is likely to remodel the business, and that will have implications on the kind of products, the kind of specifications, the prices, and so on and so forth. So it will take time to crystallize. But this is not the time to hard sell, but manage relationships and offer value-adding solutions. And that is very critical. And be in the consultative mode. The last thing I want to say is, if it is a project-based business, we need to review where we stand now. If it is already the pre-selling stage is over, then fine. Then of course, then we are in the sales mode. The sales has already taken place. But if the sales has taken place, at what stage of the project execution are we in? Do we have the manpower? Do we have installers? Do we have people to erect, and so on and so forth? So that needs to be worked back, and then we have to get forward in terms of execution. Revamping the marketing plans. So that is also very important. For project-based businesses, it is also important probably now to invoke the force majeure clause, because there has been delays, there has been defaults, but that is because of circumstances beyond the control. And as articulated by the finance minister yesterday, the force majeure clause can be revoked, and we can ask for waivers on penalties and defaults, because they have not been because of actual things not happening because of our efforts or lack of efforts, but it is because of the fact that the pandemic has not allowed for things to proceed. This much from me so far. I'll be happy to take questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ratinda. I think that was fairly insightful and comprehensive in terms of coverage. But I take away two important things that you talked about. One is how empowered sales teams are very crucial in today's times to really manage revenue recovery. And the second is how organizations need to build a purpose heading towards customers. We'll come back and discuss this more, Ratinda. But I would like to now pass it on to my next panelist, Mukund Menon.
So thanks, Ravi. A couple of things I want to touch upon today is the manpower cost, communication, change management. But I want to put all this into 4 R's, so to speak, so that we are pretty easy to talk about. I think when we say resilient mindset, I would put that into 4 R's. First would be respond, and the second R would be reflect, and the third would be reimagine, and the fourth would be rebound. I'm sure we talk about the customers. I'm sure customers are also in the same situation like we are. It's no different for them. The way we are trying to get the revenues, get the sales up, how do we contact the customers, how do we get in touch? One of those traditional methods are not going to work anymore. As not in full, but mostly it's not going to work. I'm going to cite some examples as we speak, but from a response perspective, I think the response has to be different. So I'm seeing the sales team into 3 categories. One is the foot soldiers who are out in the market traditionally. And then we have their managers who actually manage them. You give them an area or a product to manage. and then the guys who are actually managing the whole sales team and revenue. The most important in this is going to be the difficult part played would be with those people who are the guys who have the foot on the street, because they don't get to meet the customers because they're not available. So how do you respond to them? So the important thing that is going to be is making them or providing them the tools or making them understand that you have to look at other ways to reach out. So let me give this example. There is a company in the US, I'm sure you know, Lilly. They just got approved the cancer drug 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back. Given the situation, you know what they did? They went ahead and launched the product virtually. Never in the industry a product has been launched virtually. And then they had gone ahead and reached out, all the sales guys, all the sales reps were asked to reach out to each and every doctor, practitioner to explain the product. It's very difficult for the doctors to get the airtime at this time, etc. So the data shows in January, there were some 4,000 video calls and phone calls virtually done. But as we speak this month, there were 3 lakhs video calls made by the sales reps. Things have already moved. There is another drug approved by Bristol Myers. They are still waiting to see how do we do that, because there is already a Lilly doing this. So the people have taken head. The speed is going to define, are you going to be successful or are you going to drive your revenue back? So the response is going to be a very important factor. How do you respond? How quickly you respond? Listening to the customer is going to be important, because each customer is going to have different. And then the sales guys are not the clan which is not used to using digital tools. You know, they love to meet the person. So now you'll have to really orient them to get back to or get into this digital tool space. And like I said, speed matters. I'm going to recall one of the interviews between Satya Nadella and Julie Sweet, who's Satya Nadella, you know, is Microsoft CEO, and Julie Sweet is the CEO of Accenture. In their conversation, one of the things that came out very quickly was that Julie Sweet says that every CEO is looking at what is the different way we will engage, and everybody is looking at speed. Classic example is Rolls-Royce getting and changing to make ventilators. You make use of the situation, make use of the facility. Not only Rolls-Royce, quite a few manufacturing, even in India, it has happened. So the resilient mindset, it has to happen from all stages. It's not only the people at the top has to do, not on the middle or at the bottom. While we say this, 2 things are looming in every organization. What are the 2 things that are looming? One is the manpower. Any issue happens, any crisis happens, the low-hanging fruit is to go and reduce headcount. That's the easiest thing to do. You reduce cost. You've got to be extremely careful when you do that, because you would have been happy 1 or 2 months that you have reduced cost, but mind you, you would lose people that you don't want to lose. So that's something. The third thing, which ties into everything, the change, the resilient mindset, how do you want the sales to engage? How do you want them to do the supply chain to work? How do you want the production to engage and get the feedback? How do you communicate within the organization, etc.? Communication. The communication, the easiest thing is to send emails, have town halls and Zoom calls and video calls and phone calls. But what's the most important thing is going to be at this time is to get the communication back from the last man from the organization. Especially people who are foot soldiers out there in the street, out there in the marketplace, because they are going to bring you valuable information, feedbacks, and updates on what's happening in the marketplace. We may learn from the customer, we may learn from the competition, we may learn from the marketplace, what are happening. I think that's going to be pretty important when we say communication. So it's easy as an organization, and some of the C-level people would say communication would be top down, make sure everybody knows, understands, but please open the channels for people to get the information back, because you will learn what's happening there and be pretty. I heard already some of the IT companies have already created war rooms at this stage for the COVID-19 war rooms, just to focus on how do you engage with customer, how do you build revenue, and what's happening in the marketplace. So that these war rooms will send the information out to people in the organization, and then be alert, be ready to make changes and go with the flow so that you're not left behind. So what I would say is speed matters, resilience matters, and the other things that I want to talk about is reflect. You have to have the micro customer segmentation. Don't take a broad brush approach and say this is my customer. It is now going to start become very micro segmenting of customers. There's something called social listening coming up. You have to listen to the customer. You don't, even if you're doing a video call or a phone call, you're not going to call them and say, hey, what happened to this month's order? You have to talk to them, have those, talk about weather, talk about COVID, anything, because you want to actually have some empathy at this time. That's what the customers are expecting now, mostly. They want to talk that stories. They want to talk a little bit on the softer side. And I can tell you, nobody's sitting there with the money ready to spend. So at least the most important thing is to have an empathy and engage with people. So reflecting on who we are, how we did that, etc. And then reimagining. Change the way that you were traditionally doing. It's not going to work anywhere. I think everybody out there in the front needs to know. Let me give a quick example, a good story on this. There is a rental company, cab company in China. This was 3 months back, 2.5, 3 months back. Their revenues went down by 95%. So they were figuring out what they need to do. So all that they did is they said, I think we have to do things very differently. So they went and looked at all those first customers after the COVID who made a booking and canceled the booking. They went back to those same guys, made a call to them and said, we are introducing a no-touch drop facility and pick up and drop facility. There's no touch in it. And that started building. And they took the decision in 2 to 3 days. And after 3 to 4 weeks, they are back. They have secured 90% of the revenues. It's a simple thing that they did. If they were waiting for something to happen, it would not have happened. So things like that are great stories which the companies have started moving. They are starting to let loose their imagination and see, let's see what happens. Let's try this, because the traditional things are not going to happen. And the last one would be the rebound. You have to come back. You have to rebound in different ways. Go digital. Look at the analytics. See what the competition is happening. What are the opportunities out there? We need to have that, how do we call it, the startup mentality? Because the startup mentality is always about rebounding every day, every month, every quarter. You see failure, you rebound back again. I think that's rebounding is going to be a very, very significant. So I would close my piece by saying 4 R's: respond, reflect, reimagine, and rebound. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mukund. I think your 4R model is extremely valuable and a good one for people to start working on. And also for sales teams to start looking at how quickly can they rebound from these times to get back to market. So thanks, Mukund. Next, we really move on to our next speaker, Mr. Anand Rao.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Well, I do, of course, in the present organization too, where I'm currently working with the Adani Power. There are a lot of issues and concerns which are more similar to what the employees would face in an organization. So I will touch upon some of those issues and concerns. My perspective is that in the next 2 years, it's going to be more of cost focused rather than revenue focused. because the old age, saying that money saved is money earned. So there's going to be a lot of focus on cost saving. So here I would say the pressure would be on the sales team on receivables. They need to ensure the aging of sales and collections is no more going to be. It's a passe. They will need to get the money on for better cash flow. They need to put the money on the table. So they need to talk to the customers. Probably you need to look at incentives in getting the money in, so that the cash flow is quite healthy within the organization. That is a very important aspect. As I say this, sales also, revenue side also needs to be looked at. So it's very, very important for the sales guys to look at, what are the kind of competencies do they actually require to drive sales. If today, going forward, I would say the customer is not going to loosen his purse. So the mindset is to save, not to spend. So here lies the skill set of the sales guy to actually get money out of the purse of these customers. So you will have to choose innovative ways. It's more like need versus want. Today, I would rather spend on my needs and not my wants. So if you're in an industry which is in the luxurious products, or let's say furniture or furnishings, would a customer want to buy today in this scenario? I think that's very important to understand. So you need to have innovative ways of actually selling. That's one of the most important things for a sales guy today. Companies always believe that COVID is today. We don't know what it is tomorrow. So they would like to look at going forward. So companies will start investing in technology. When you start depending more on technology, you'll find that probably do you need that many people in an organization? There will be a clear distinction between the top performers and the mediocre performers. And you'll have to work with less people. Going forward, I mean, if I had a luxury of having 10 people to run my sales team, today I'll have to work with 3 or 4. So who are those 3 or 4 will have to be decided in terms of the performance and the competency levels. Also, upskilling will happen in saying that, look, how do I actually go about selling now? How do I use different ways of selling? I think that becomes very, very important. Productivity will be much more important, not only for the sales team, but for the labor also, the organization also. Organizations which have an extended arm of the vendors. Now, vendors also will have pressure in terms of cost reduction, because the lesser you invest in terms of cost, the more profits you make. So the principal organizations, the leading organizations will have to look at their vendors. So they'll get into detailing, okay, in terms of what are the expenses, and then probably you would look at areas of improvement or changes. After the COVID, there are migrant laborers. In fact, we are facing the same situation out here. The fear is that the migrant labor who could not move will start moving out. And the ones who are already gone, we're not sure whether they would come back or how many of them would come back. But then that would be a big challenge, getting back labor, the amount of labor within the organization to give you the kind of output so that you start selling. This would be across all organizations. And probably, again, those laborers also will need to upscale. Multi-skilling will also happen. That becomes a very important aspect of investment which the organization will invest. Plus, they will also look at how they can train these guys in doing more with less. And of course, the pressure on the traditional organizations is going to be much higher. As it is, you have the new generation coming in and taking over. So they've had their own pressures happening right now. But the traditional organizations who have a large amount of manpower will have a little tougher time in terms of how they would relook into it. And typically they work on emotion. So it's very difficult to let go. Even such organizations have sales teams which are emotionally bound. Typically, loyalty is what they give a lot of importance. So that would all change. So everybody would have to actually get up to the new level of performance that the expectations of the organization will be. And as far as the sales and the others would go, I think there would be more shift from the fixed pay to the variable pay. That would be another aspect which will come in. So there will be more and more of variable pay And that would be quite challenging in terms of earning it. You would have to actually perform. Not only you'll have to perform for yourself, but you'll have to ensure that the organization also performs. So the sales team here would not only have to deliver what is expected, but probably support the other teams too in ensuring the delivery happens and the kind of expectations and the output the organization requires. Well, the other part I would say is today, because of this situation and a lot of manpower being turned out from the organization, the availability of manpower is there in the market. So if at all I need a sales guy, I need him to perform extremely well. If he doesn't, I have an opportunity for getting somebody else. So the patience to wait and see how you perform will actually go down. So they would expect you start delivering. Either you deliver it or you shape in or ship out. I think that's going to be the trend going forward. And here also, I would say, in many of the businesses, you have the middlemen. Typically, even in the organization, within the organization, the top would actually like to interact with the front. The not the middle, actually, right down at the bottom, because they find things easier, communication much faster. So, as my friend said, I think communication is something which is going to be a key. And apart from speed and agility that they would expect from the sales team, I think what organizations will also need to do is, how do you empower your frontline sales guys to take a decision? Okay, it's either you or me. So your sales guy has to have all the tools to take decision. So the way you are going to empower him, the way you're going to coach him, and the way he's going to take decisions on the field will also decide. The customer is also going to look into it more in detail today. He's just not going to accept the product the way it is. So he would ask you questions like, what difference will it make to me in my life? Is it going to improve? Do I need to buy? He may probably link it with other products too and say, if I buy this, I don't need to buy other things also, so that he would save. I think that would be the way going forward. So I would say in totality, of course, safety and health, the other aspect, is going to be the key. I wouldn't be surprised tomorrow if the sales guy goes to any of the customers, he'll open a thermal gun and start checking your temperature, because he's outside meeting so many people. He interacts with multiple. He comes by bus, or he comes by train, or he comes, whatever it is, the frontline guys. So how would the customer accept him first? In interacting, I think, will be a big challenge. What should be done? The organization also has to think that if I have a sales team today and he has to go and meet the customer, what is it? Is he going to wear the PPEs and go, which is impossible? So what is he going to do? I think that's a big challenge which the organizations will have. I think that's very important. And I guess your sales team today, they eat outside. So probably that may also reduce in terms of what we need to do. So I think in totality, I would say productivity is definitely going to be the key. Okay. And it's not going to be an easy push. It's going to be a hard push for the sales guy. He has to look at innovative ways and think out of the box. And of course, if you are a great performer, every organization will want you. So retaining the high performers will also be a key. I have these things to say. Thank you very much.
I would like to pass it on to my next panelist, Lloyd Matthias. Lloyd.
Thanks, Ravi. I just gave a couple of pointers and things of where I see COVID really impacting the world we live in. I think there will be definitive shifts in consumer behavior. But what I mean by this is clearly the whole hygiene consciousness, the whole concept of remote working is now becoming real. I think today in the new reality, we'll need to reevaluate that, a lot of which can get done remotely. I think the other reality we have to all accept is the increased confidence in technology, right? The whole business of video conferencing, online payments, right? Lower dependence on brick and mortar. The fact that we've been able to transact a lot of our lives in the last 50 days without having the direct dependence of going out or making physical cash payments. I think that whole increase in confidence in technology is real. Another big shift has happened in the education space, right? Studying remotely, online learning, e-papers and books have become real. And lastly, I think is the increased focus on health that people have, which is greater investments in healthcare, health tech startups, but essentially the fact that people are now conscious that you need to build immunity. If COVID is here for a longer period, you have to stay, we'll have to slowly get our lives limping back to normal. then what kind of immunity do we build? Purely in the context of sales, and I'll just spend 5 minutes on this. I'll just talk about how does this entire epidemic impact sales. I think there are 4 ways. One is a deferment, right? A lot of sales get deferred, right? If you were in the market out to buy a new LED TV or some new thing, I think you're going to push it back, right? There's uncertainty. One is stores are closed, but 2 is people have a little uncertainty, saying time to conserve cash. Don't know how the new fund next few months are going to be. So deferment is one thing that's going to happen in terms of consumer response. The second is down trading, right? A lot of consumers are going to down trade, right? Being fearful of the scenario in the next few months, people will now down trade. Instead of buying a super premium something, they might move down to a regular or a normal model, right? So there'll be a fair amount of loss in terms of down trading. The third is what I would call a certain destruction of sales, right? All our holiday plans for this April, May, June period pretty much have gone, right? And that's a kind of permanent destruction. It's not a deferment. For right now, it's pretty much gone. And then there are certain categories that effectively disappear, right? So things that will not be the same again, right? We all know that after that, Twin Tower bombing, airport security wasn't a breeze. They all got used to kind of, breezing through in 5 minutes, right? Now we've come to budget for those 15-minute, half an hour waits, those long queues, the full body frisking. Soon after demonetization, we saw the impact of digital payments, right? A lot of us had apps like Paytm. So I think there'll be some fundamental shifts and changes which, as individuals, we really need to look at. I'm talking about some key strategies that companies have adopted in the current environment, largely led to sales. I think the one very obvious one for many companies to look at right now is to use your existing set of products, but look at different channels, right? Online is the least disruptive right now, right? You've seen a lot of FMCG majors, Marico, Britannia, pretty much tie up quickly with the Swiggies, the Zomatos, the Dunzos of the world, saying that, hey, we can get a lot of your stuff delivered to the home, right? So the dependence on online has suddenly become front and center. It's not that they're going to ditch their existing distribution for a long time, but for right now, that's a quick pivot, something that still keeps a little bit of their distribution lines going, right? There are companies using their same infrastructure, but doing different products, right? Some in a kind of altruistic manner, right? Dyson launched a new ventilator. Diageo converted some of their spirits lines for sanitizers. So there have been some doing those pivots, which in a sense buys them goodwill, buys them brand equity in the long term. There are some using their current products, but using it very differently, right? One of the good examples I saw, and out in Gurgaon where I live, is the Lemon Tree hotels actually had a tie-up with the nearby hospitals. So they plotted all their properties which are within a 1 kilometer radius of a hospital, and went and did a tie-up with the hospital. Obviously at a lower rate, but it still kept the business going. Talking about actually doctors and medical staff who take that 1 kilometer walk, who have a whole facility that's completely controlled by them, sanitized by them, and then reusing it, right? So I think it's the ability to pivot, I think, is some of the strategies that a lot of companies will need to adopt. I just talk about 2 points before closing. I think one is what will be the good hallmark of companies that can brave this storm. Both Mukund, Andy, and Ratinda all spoke about resilience. I think that is absolutely critical. I think besides resilience, there's also the importance of being agile, right? The ability to pivot and seize new opportunities. I'll just give one example. On the 4th of April, the Shanghai Fashion Week was to take place, right? The Shanghai Fashion Week is among the top 10 fashion weeks in the world, right? So like the London Fashion Week, and, the Paris Fashion Week, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, on the 4th of April, that was right in the thick of the controversy. The view was, let's not have the fashion. And then a bunch of organizers got together and said, why don't we do it online? So effectively, they told each of the 34 participating designers that you will use your phone for all care. You will get 2 models who will be thoroughly screen checked and all the rest of it. And they will be able to do your costumes, within your studio. But you will upload this live. So what happened was the entire Shanghai Fashion Week went remote, went digital, went online. And here's the funny part. The typical fashion week had about 3,000 visitors, the high and the mighty, the fashionistas, the wine and cheese events. This went en masse to public. And there were a lot of smaller store owners in the smaller provinces of China that went. So most designers did between 3x, 12x their normal business, right? So it was a fortuitous change, but they were able to capitalize. And now in the world of fashion, the question is, should we really be spending so much on these very fine dining events in 5-star hotels, or should we open it up? So a classic change of the whole agility. right? The other is the importance of holding the team together, right? Companies that will brave the storm are the ones that will be able to hold their team together. How do they communicate, not just with their employees, with their customers, with their landlords, renegotiate contracts, with their vendors and partners, right? And that is critical, is the ability to really hold one's teams together. The third critical point I'd point out is to re-alter the whole decision-making process. Through these conference calls, a lot of us have seen it in the last few months. Companies that have been faster to respond is where decision-making is delegated almost to the front line. I know there have to be parameters set in. I know there have to be limits and rules and restrictions kept in place. But the lower that you're able to push decision-making down the line with proper checks and balances, the more effective your customer response is going to be, right? So think about empowering your teams, putting checks and balances in place. But I think real aspect is about pushing down decision-making. And I think the last and critical thing in terms of a company response is the reskilling. How is it that you can reskill your current teams? You can also upskill a lot of them, right? Another great example comes to mind is the Scandinavian airlines. They go by the term SAS. They recognize that the airline business in the next 6 months to a year will not be the same. They offered a lot of their teams reskilling in terms of training to be nursing staff, right? A lot of employees have grabbed it because what you recognize is that the business of hospitals won't come to a halt. The business of airlines will, or at least will be impacted severely, right? And there's also a common synergy between flight staff, the cabin crew, and paramedical staff, nursing, right? So they offered that. That again was a great instance of being resilient and agile. And I think the last point, specifically to a lot of the early stage companies I work with, is about being prudent with your cash. What are the things that you can push out, which don't need to happen? And what are the things that are essential to keep your business rolling, right? So minimize cash burn, go out and talk to your vendors, go out and talk to your landlords, see if you can renegotiate contracts. The government is doing a series of things. Look at anything that's applicable to your respective business. So how do you kind of minimize your cash burn in the short term? And how do you go out and communicate with all your stakeholders, be they employees, be they vendors, be they your partners, be they your customers, your distributors? I think these are things that will be absolutely critical. So a very broad-based perspective, but key strategies that I thought I'd share. And we'll pass it back to Ravi for any Q&A or any other comments that you have, Ravi. Thank you.
I think the entire audience will endorse the fact that it was an excellent and a very insightful discussion. Everyone had different points of view, yet I think one thing which was very common, which Ravi very well summed up, is that the importance of sales actually increases in the current scenario, whether it is reskilling, variable, or whatever, the 4 R's that Mukund said. The bottom line seems to be that sales is now even more important than it ever was earlier. Like Andy said, collections are going to be important. Yeah, but who does it? Sales. Who's the soldier on the field? It's the sales guys. And that will become even more important. And that kind of, maybe it's the right time for us to launch INSALESPRO, because sales was always important. Now it's even more important. And I'm glad we did this. Thank you so much for sparing the time, all of you, and really appreciate your time. And thanks once again to the panelists and the team.